Thanks for being here. All right, welcome everyone to this edition of the Public Safety Drone Review. I'm Miriam McNabb, editor at Drone Life. My co-host is Tim Martin of the Regional Training Center. We have with us, as always, Charles Werner of Drone Responders. And today we are honored to have as our guest Stuart Lawless from the UK. Stuart, tell me exactly what your title is. Stuart.
Afternoon, everyone. So I'm the a little bit delayed there. So I'm the operational lead at the National Police Chief Council. So we oversee and coordinate the police forces in the UK, and I'm part of that drone portfolio there. So thanks very much for having me today, and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. So we will be discussing, when we get to that point in the program, we will be discussing the work that Drone Responders is doing with Stuart and Stuart's organization to help establish training standards that work internationally. But let's get started right now, talking about a little bit of what has been critical in the US over the last week or so. So some of the important kind of background news to drone use in law enforcement, drone use everywhere in the United States has been that, of course, we did avert the government shutdown. Congress did at the last minute pass an extension to funding, which would prevent some of those shutdowns. And part of that package that they passed was an extension to FAA authorization through December 31st of 2023. So FAA reauthorization package of 2018 was set to expire September 30th. Of 2023. Those are 5-year packages. We have an extension now through the end of December. Now, what's important about this is that if Congress kind of gets together, the House has already overwhelmingly passed their FAA reauthorization bill. They're waiting for the Senate to pass theirs. Senate is hung up on a couple of different issues. Then they will have to kind of come together, get consensus to pass a package. In the past, this hasn't always been that easy. We did have 18 extensions between the 2012 reauthorization and 2018 reauthorization. We don't always get a full 5-year funding package. But the reason we want that, and we want that reauthorization package sent through, is that does lay out kind of priorities, puts deadlines on things in specific for the drone industry. The FAA reauthorization package passed by the House calls for a ruling on flight beyond visual line of sight in a very timely manner. So we will see how that progresses. But in any case, if you have to fly anywhere, you will not have the TSA working for free. You will not have your air traffic controllers working for free. All of the air traffic control trainees will not be sent home. So we are good at least through the end of December for the FAA. And Charles, that has a definite effect on waivers that you guys are working on. Oh, we should also talk about the FAA Administrator. So FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker, FAA veteran, currently with an advanced aviation company, Supernal, right? Mike Whitaker is Biden's pick for FAA Administrator. That must be confirmed by the Senate. Biden's first pick was not confirmed by the Senate, or it looked like it was getting dicey, so he withdrew his application. Now we have Mike Whitaker, but again, that does require an act of Congress to get that permanent administrator.
Yeah, so thankfully a resolution came forward to stop a government shutdown. So that means that process, which will hopefully start very soon for the Senate confirmation of Mike Whitaker, which from everything that I've heard of seems to be a very good pick for very big and wide knowledge of aviation across the board. And in addition to that, hopefully that will lead into filling a lot of the acting positions. As you know, acting positions are a little bit reluctant to make some decisions because it can be career ending. So they went, or you won't get appointed as the permanent. So that's with the waivers. The good thing about this is, of course, all the unnecessary or non-emergency waivers would have been gone by the wayside. Now, the one good news that we found out was the emergency waivers, as we know as SGIs, special government interest waivers, would have still continued to go forward. They're considered an essential service, so that if we needed to call and get a special waiver, that would be in place. So, knock on wood, next time we get to this in 3 months, that we'll get through it just as quickly and move forward. But we'll see.
All right, fingers crossed. Let's move into some of the news stories that we're seeing. And I want to start out actually with one that Charles picked up on, which is the ACLU has published. This is now the second article that I've seen where they've published relative to police drone use. So their first one listed out some concerns. You can see on Drone Life that Matt Sloan from Skyfire Consulting actually called them up, discussed it with them. He wrote something about that discussion. Charles, now they are saying specifically the cases which they'd like to see drones used in police, or more specifically, when they don't want to see drones used in policing. Can you lay that out for us? You read that to me in pre-show.
Yeah, I think drones as a first responder has been kind of a light to a torch, if you will. Now seeing drones flying in the sky from 911 calls, overseeing the scene before police officers arrive, which in my opinion is a very good thing. And we found out that it's been really a huge de-escalator in a lot of events. But they've come out with 5 main areas. One is usage limits, and it says a drone should be deployed by law enforcement only with a warrant in an emergency, or when there are specific or articulable grounds to believe that the drone will collect evidence relating to a specific criminal act. Now, in most cases, DFR is responding to an emergency 911 call. So in that case, it would already fulfill that requirement. But then they talk about data retention, which we have pushed forward as well, saying we've got to have data retention. We've got to do it in such a way that it's responsible, that it has a time limit, and it doesn't become this vast storage of everything on everybody for the longest time. So a lot of them are using body camera policies that say in 30 days it will be expunged unless there is a training element to it, or it's actually tied to an investigation of a crime. And then the policy basically saying that the usage policy on drones should be decided by the public's representatives, not by police departments, and the policy should be clear, written, and open to the public. And we push that very hard from drone responders, saying that you should do community outreach first before you even think about doing a program, making sure you get acceptance, have your policies clearly written to show what you're going to use the drones for and what you're not going to use the drones for. And one of the big things that they are opposed to is random surveillance. The term surveillance drone is very much in opposition by the ACLU. But again, that's not what DFR does. DFR is responding to a call to get information as quickly as possible. And then the other one is abuse prevention accountability. Use of domestic drones should be subject to open audits and proper oversight to prevent misuse. And the last, of course, is domestic drones should not be equipped with lethal or non-lethal weapons. Now, UAS and drones and aircraft in general cannot be weaponized, period. So that's already a law. But those are the 5 main concerns. And I think that the step going forward will be for us to address those as proactively as we can to make sure that we're actually doing what is desired by the ACLU as best we can.
And I would be curious to see, and Stuart, I'd love to hear your input on this too, as it relates to what's happening in the UK, is is this a situation where we're going to find some of these things are already addressed by other laws? So data retention, warrantless searches, things like that. Do we already have things in place that say, you can't do that?
Yeah, I think certainly in the UK, we've got some legislation in place, particularly around data capture and its retention, particularly for policing. That's really strictly adhered to by our police forces. So I think that element in the UK is not really an issue for us. I think certainly the bit that Charles picked up is definitely something we need to enhance across the world, is that how do we engage with the public at a very early point in our programs? There's a lot of myths out there that I think we can really easily quash with some simple facts and figures around how we actually deploy our drones, what they're there to deliver. So I think a lot of that work that takes place with that engagement is absolutely across the world. But certainly from our side in the UK, data retention is, like I said, very heavily legislated already. So we're probably slightly in front of the US on that one point alone. But certainly engagement's strong for us.
Right.
And those guidelines that Charles just wrote off, thankfully, those have been in place. I think those came out in 2016 or 2017, those 5. And I think a lot of programs, that was the first thing the ACL came up with was those guidelines. So they might be rehashing or republishing their thoughts on that, but most programs are structured around those guidelines, which follow the IACP guidelines, which is similar to what Stewart's organization does in the United States, and the presidential memorandum on law enforcement drone operations. They all follow about the same guidelines, and a lot of states, you have to publish your policy, you have to make it open to the public. So other states, like I'm in Oregon right now, and they actually need warrants on a lot of the ops that they do with law enforcement drone operations. So I think we're doing a good job in public safety already, following those guidelines. DFR, I think, is kind of the new hot topic that they've come up with, is just making sure that DFR, which isn't really an old concept as per se of how we're responding to calls and what we're using the drones for, but the DFR is growing so fast across the country and in Europe now that it's becoming the focus of this.
Yeah, I think what they've honed in is quote unquote surveillance drones. That's their main thing of that's pushing this forward.
And so let's talk about that a little bit, because sort of one article that we saw actually related to work being done in the UK, where they have a very high crime area along the beachfront in a coastal town, and they are flying drones at night. And they say that's much more effective than having police trying to monitor sort of large areas of dark beachfront, right? So for obvious reasons. So I mean, it's proactive policing, so it's the same as, isn't it kind of the same as if you put up a whole bunch of streetlights and CCTV cameras? Or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, some of the cities have thousands of cameras. Right. I think that it's
so if you don't have that and you fly a drone up and down a very high crime area at night to protect pedestrians.
Yeah, I think there was a story in New York that came out recently about drones being used by law enforcement. And the story was that the law enforcement in New York City, were going to use them to monitor gatherings,
parties. We talked about this last month. Yeah.
And I think it really gets down to the story, and that's not really the intention. The intention was, if there is some activity that occurs that becomes concerning violence, that they could very quickly assess the situation. But again, it's how you tell the story, or how it's interpreted.
Right.
And Stuart, I was actually surprised. I actually had the opportunity to meet with Stuart in London. It was a great experience to learn about what they're doing there, both in London and in with the National Chiefs Police Council. But my question to you, Stuart, is I had no idea how large the London manned aviation unit was. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and how the drones might either complement or replace that. Is the intention to because essentially and same with the United States, what manned aviation has been doing since the 70s in the United States, we're now doing with unmanned. So I would imagine the concerns are the same in the UK, but there's not a big. I don't think there's a big difference between manned and unmanned aviation doing the same job.
Yeah, I think for us, certainly across the UK, we've got a national police air service that provide all of our manned aviation coverage across the UK. I think the bit for us is how do we start blending and integrating unmanned into that so we can make sure that we get the right asset for the right task. I think there's still a little bit of work we need to do in the drone community to make sure that the capabilities meet or exceed what we've got for the helicopters in some environments, particularly with some of our high risk environments, particularly around waterways and things like that. So I think there's certainly a big piece of work that we need to do to say, and particularly like we mentioned with DFR, that's starting to move into a space where we would never have manned aviation provide that coverage. You wouldn't have it for every 909 call coming in. You wouldn't have it respond so proactively to incidents as soon as they're reported. So there's that different element of drones that are coming in, and I think that will change drastically the way in which we police. But I think very much for years to come, there's still very much that blended approach for us, and it's how do we start integrating the two that's a bit of our kind of work in progress at the moment.
Okay. So many of the stories that we found this month when we were looking through were really kind of this organization is holding those initial community meetings to get community input about their drone use. The law enforcement, I think in the law enforcement community, it has been sort of out there for long enough so that people have the good data points, the good stories and so forth to link to those, but there is still resistance in some communities. And some of what we're seeing, I was looking at just headlines that don't help, whereas like LA Magazine, so Santa Monica gets drones and they call them RoboCops, the headline. RoboCops in Santa Monica. I'm not sure that's actually going to help with autonomous systems. Also, Wired magazine reporting on the new Skydio X10 says this drone can track you in the dark. So I think part of this is still down to how we tell the story, how we present it. It's just every single one of us out on the street, making sure we use the right words.
And I wanted to add, so there is, and just Tim, just for your knowledge as well, there is a new 15-page document out that's actually gone into more than the drones called Protecting Privacy from Aerial Surveillance. That's the new document that goes into telling how specifically drones can be more invasive. And it talks about, comparatively speaking, if you're looking at helicopters and other things, that the cost and price of those aircraft of helicopters greatly limited the use of aerial technology by government. Now with the drones, it's making that type of surveillance available to every agency of every law enforcement everywhere. So that's, and then the technologies of facial recognition, being able to see through certain things. So it's a very long report that goes into a lot more than what they initially came out with as far as the rules.
Yeah.
So in the UK, one of the articles that I found was a BBC article about Thames Valley increasing their program, doing more training, getting people in. They are using them at festivals for safety, crowd control. But there again, you have the same civil liberty campaigners like Big Brother Watch have called the use of drones by police sinister, it says. But it talks about all of the positive work that's being done, and the police chief says very clearly, no fishing expeditions. So we just don't put out a drone and start looking for bad guys, right? They respond to specific events. So what are you seeing in terms of the reasons that police give in the UK for needing these? I'm looking here and they're saying, staffing is a major problem. Certainly that is a major problem here in the US too. Funding is always a major problem for law enforcement. So they're just kind of able to get this everyone hates the term force multiplier, but they're able to leverage leverage fewer resources to do more work. Is that kind of your sense of it, Stuart, or is this element of the manned aircraft systems blending in kind of at play also?
So I think the bit for us is drones are a really affordable way of getting really key situational awareness to the front line. And I think that's the bit that's drastically changed over the years, where previously air support would come and it would provide situational awareness, but you're limited by the number of helicopters you've got, given the cost that they are. Where you compare that to drones, they're a really affordable way of getting that situational awareness to the front line in an accessible way. I think that's a bit we're starting to see. So when it comes to these events, public fairs or shows, music events, you're starting to see police use drones more often at those events, because actually it's capability that we never had previously that actually now gives greater situational awareness to the command team, make sure that we can put the right resources in the right place to deal with incidents as they arise. And crucially, we can make sure that the public remain safe in those events. So things like that is ultimately where we see a massive increase. And I think from a fishing expedition perspective, we've already mentioned majority of our tasking, if not all of our tasking, is pretty much a 909 call comes in, we respond, retrospectively to that call to provide support. There is, no proactive operations. There's no kind of patrolling up and down
Right,
in
police
a
have
given
their
area
hands full
as a
just
fishing
responding
exercise.
to
So
real things.
for us, that's really where we're starting to see that use of drones come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think this is something that we as a community need to be careful of, is that overwatch of festivals and large gatherings and things doesn't get slid under, someone doesn't sort of confuse that with surveillance, because that's really a different function, right? That's a security function. So
Yeah, I think that one of the other things that we have to mention here is, I hate to say this, but the threats that are out there now in our numerous countries is probably worse now than it's ever been in the United States, with things that are happening with the border crossings and now infiltrating into cities. We're seeing crime, and even in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live, which is a relatively small community. We've now had 19 people arrested that were part of cartel, and it involved drugs and fentanyl, enough fentanyl to kill everybody in our entire community. So there are much more broader risks than we've probably seen in a while.
all right, I want to get one in before we switch over to talking about training standards and developing kind of an international framework here. I want to get one in about fire. And the piece that I found on fire was, of course, Dragonfly sent some fixed wings over to Canada to help detect, map Canadian hotspots. And what I was sort of struck with was this was really an effort by the company Dragonfly to go and assist to put their aircraft through the paces, sort of demonstrate what it could do, but they were there orchestrating the entire workflow. And while that's on the one hand great, and I'm sure it provided tremendous response, I feel like, drones have been an integral part of firefighting, but we still don't have that whole workflow with the technology ecosystem that's needed to actually detect and map the hotspots and give it back. That every fire department doesn't have those tools at their fingertips yet. We're still sort of flying over, seeing like where are the exits, which way is it going, and we could be doing a whole lot more.
Yeah, so there is an organization or company called Overwatch Aero, which is using real-time satellite imagery and combined with drone imagery, and they're able to fly at much higher altitude. So that's something that the FAA has worked out to give actual mapping capabilities. But as you mentioned, it's not still available to all the departments that are out there. But it is able to give you very quick mapping and tell you the intensity, the direction. So that's a start. But I think in general, we're seeing a lot of things. And there is the NASA Wildfire Industry Working Group that's actually working through now on two specific things. One on ConOps, on how to operate during these types of situations, but also really pushing the idea of emerging technologies. And that means starting to get to the bigger drones. That means that we could do logistical movement of equipment from one place to another, that we can do actual firefighting extinguishment, and we can do the backfire operations where you're burning the fire ahead of the fire for much longer distances where you're limited now with the smaller UAS. And so that also combines into hybrid types of technologies where they're using a fossil fuel that fuels a generator that then continues to charge the batteries, which gives it a much longer extended flight. So there is a lot that's coming.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely needed to, I'm going to put in a plug, droneresponders.org, find your way there. So many resources like the ones that Charles just mentioned. So if you are working in fire, please do check out all of those resources and see what more you can be doing. We just
what
had
I found,
one.
Miriam, real quick, I'm sorry, regarding to kind of answer your question, the respective of end users, the fire departments that we deal with and in California mostly, they don't have the manpower for a drone team or to be able to spare the personnel, especially on structure fires, let alone larger scale forest fires. Cal OES and Cal Fire are actively involved in drone use, but a lot of agencies they just don't. They rely on outside companies or private companies, or in this case, this company came in and was very effective because they already had the infrastructure set up to do the mapping and do the have the equipment. But a lot of fire departments, they just don't have the manpower, and that's what's causing them to be a little bit behind the curve compared to law enforcement, where we can have teams and we can assign, you're the drone team, you're doing this for this incident, versus the fire department. They don't really have that yet. So it's coming. I think they'll get there as time goes, but it's still a struggle for them.
Well, and to that point, we had law enforcement agencies that were actually flying fire missions and providing some of the mapping that was showing some of the destruction for people that were evacuated so they could actually see what the conditions of their home were. So yeah, you're exactly right.
I just wanted to respond to one question that came in, someone who was having trouble with the bandwidth. These recordings are published on the Drone Life TV YouTube channel that goes up in a few days. Okay, let's move on. So we hit some of the issues. The news stories always kind of highlight the issues, and then it's good to kind of have the second half of the show be about progress, right? So let's talk about some of the work, Charles and Stuart, that you're doing collaboratively to help introduce training standards. And I know one of the previous drone responders surveys that was sent out, some astronomical, more than 90%, I think, of respondents said that training was a major issue for their departments in integrating drone use, right? You got to get the licenses, you got to figure it out. So Charles, Stuart, over to you.
Yeah, I'll start first. I think that what we've seen is there's a lot of great training that's going on, and I'll give a shout out to RTC, which Tim works with, doing a lot of great training out there that we've seen. There still is not an overall standardized accepted program and certifications that we've seen in other standards. For example, firefighting and law enforcement, you have different levels of certification that you go on, what type of aircraft, the payloads, and how they operate. So if you're an engine operator or an aerial operator, you have specific requirements, but in the drone world, we don't have that yet. So that's one of the things, and it was funny because Stuart and I had a conversation. We're at the same place, except I'm looking at it saying there's lots of great stuff that's going on, but it's still kind of a hodgepodge. And he said, well, we want to work on that. So I've just offered to be a collaborative partner with him as he goes forward. Is if we can share things, we're glad to do it. And he's looking at things on a bigger scale, and I'll let him flip over to talk about that.
Yeah, I think the bit for us is really trying to capture how do we align and standardize all of the police forces in the UK, which, there's 48 of them. They've certainly at the beginning turn of the year had 48 different ways of doing things, and that makes things difficult when you're trying to do a national program. So the real bit for us is really about aligning and standardizing all of our forces at the moment. One of the core principles we're sticking to is bringing in those at an operational level so that we have operational people actually setting out what that standard looks like for us. So anyone can come in and kind of set out a strategic objective and how we meet that, but actually delivering on the front line sometimes is very different. We have a lot of pressures on the front line that we need to be aware of. So bringing everyone into the mix for that is being really crucial. We've got about 70 police officers from around the UK that are part of all of our programs. And the main one really delivering training for us at the moment is Centre of Excellence. So we want the UK, and we've got some work to do. We're slightly behind some of the other countries, particularly some of those American forces. But how do we get the UK to be at leading edge of delivery? Fundamentally, the backbone of that is a Centre of Excellence where people around the world kind of look to us for our training syllabuses that we've developed. How do we start delivering that to the front line and making sure that those that are delivering that capability day in, day out have got a really high standard that members of the public can trust and utilise going forward? But equally, we can be certain that the kit and training we deliver to our officers is appropriate for the tasking that they're doing. And ultimately, all of this work that we're doing fundamentally solves a lot of problems around the world. And that's why linking in with trials is a really important part for us, so that everything we do is collaborative with drone responders so that we can share it around the world, because some of the challenges we've got here in the UK are absolutely identical to those forces around the world, particularly around standards. And some of the issues that forces have around the world with their regulators and getting that standard approved. So that's a really key part for us, I think.
And I think some of the other things we see is we have opportunities, and we've done this with Canada, where we have regulatory successes with waivers. Canada has been able to use similar things. So when we're doing DFR, or we're doing tactical waivers during dangerous missions, that we're given some flexibility, but regulators often look to the other regulators to see how those things are progressing. And usually if one advances something, then it helps the other. But I just wanted to make your life sound a little bit easier, Stuart. I just wanted to let you know that in the United States, we only have nearly 18,000 different law enforcement agencies. So just wanted to give you a little bit of reassurance that you're in a little bit better situation than we are.
Well, let me ask a question too. I know this may sound silly, but I think that one of the major things that differentiates is we don't have sort of the national ruling body, right? We're kind of on a statewide basis, or not even really, right? I mean, it's almost department by department.
Well, it's local, state, federal, and that includes police departments, sheriff's departments, and state troopers. So it's a mixed bag for us.
Okay. So Stuart, what I found very interesting in our discussion together was how your structure is and what the intent of your program is going to be, and the results it will have, and what the implications it will have on a national level, if you will. So if you could just kind of go over how the National Police Chiefs Council is set up and what your goal is over the next, I think you said it was 5 years, and how that will impact every law enforcement agency in the country.
Yeah, so I think you touched on that really important bit. We are kind of unique in policing that we are a coordination body that sits and coordinates all the 48 forces in the UK, and as a result of that, we can hopefully get that kind of standardization and alignment. Whereas obviously in the US, with those vast numbers of police forces, federal, state, etc., that's really challenging. So we are in a unique position in the UK where we can start to do that work. Back in January this year, we did a big national review when we took on the drone portfolio to say, where are we currently at? What's our current state of play with drone operation? Because that varied. And like I said, there was 48 different ways of doing things, 48 different approaches to how forces employ drones in their force area. So once we got that review, we then set out a program of works that takes police drone operations in their current format, which is typically visual line of sight, no DFR in place in the UK at the moment, very much patrol vehicle, get your drone out the back of the car, deploy it to the scene. How do we take all of those forces, bring them to a set standard, create a solid foundation that we can then start building upon to get to beyond visual line of sight operations at a sustainable level? Crucially for us, then, how do we start integrating DFR into that as well along that journey? Now, that program itself has got a number of different programs in it. Like I mentioned, Centre of Excellence is one of those, which looks at training. How do we standardize, align all of our training? How do we start looking at developing training packages that are bespoke for public safety operations? Because again, we aren't, your typical wedding photographer flying a drone. We are putting ourselves in situations, delivering a capability where often lives are at risk. So we need to be above and beyond the minimum standards that the regulator set. And then crucially, how do we we talked earlier on the call about how do we start sharing that kind of policy and governance with particularly members of the public. In the UK, we have something called an authorised professional practice, which is available publicly on the internet. Anyone can go and have a look at it. And that really sets out how do we deliver drone capability in the UK? What do we expect as minimum standards? What do the members of the public expect as a capability to be delivered through that? And then we also look at how do we start dealing with our regulator and managing and working with them, crucially, so that we can get to a position very similar to like the US have got with waiver systems. So we are against state aircraft, but how do we fit into our regulatory framework at the moment is quite challenging. So there's a lot of work to be done through that. But crucially, it's the same hurdles that everyone else has got internationally, which is how do we demonstrate what we are doing is safe and that we mitigate as much as possible the risks that are associated to drone flying, and that's a really key part of our program moving forward. And then obviously you've got EagleX, which we've just announced, which is our kind of innovative approach to getting cutting edge technology to the front line. So typically in policing in the UK, we are kind of second best. The industry gets there first, and private sector gets there first to some of that technology. We really want to be at the leading edge. We want industry to come to us with their innovative concepts of how to deploy drones, what kind of technology is available to us, so that we can make sure on the front line, and crucially for our members of the public, when we're dealing with incidents, we have the best kit that's available and the safest kit that's available to deliver that capability. And that's a really exciting project. And fundamentally, in EagleX for us will sit DFR, which we're just looking to kickstart early next year as well.
Yeah, we did have a question come in for you, Stuart, which is, what is the preference in the UK police forces going forward? This is actually a very interesting question. It's kind of, will you have full-time police drone teams who are specialists, or will you have just police officers who can fly a drone as needed as a secondary skill?
So I think crucially from an MPCC perspective, we're really keen that we give that operational independence to local forces. So we'll give all of the toolkit, essentially how to deliver that training, what the minimum standards looks like, what the kind of kit looks like to deliver that capability. And ultimately, how a local force deploys that is against their local requirements for air support. So what they do operationally locally, we'll leave down to them. Some already have 24/7 police drone capability. So West Midlands Police have got a dedicated resource on 24 hours a day that just deliver drone capability as a response mode. And then you've got some others that have just got part-time officers. So it's entirely up to them going forward.
And is anybody outsourcing?
No, so everyone at the moment is currently delivering that in-house as an in-house capability. And I think there's a number of, particularly for public safety, there are a number of elements involved in that, particularly for the UK, that makes it slightly challenging going forward to do that. There's obviously elements I know in the US, particularly around DFR, that could be outsourced, and that's obviously to be looked at as part of our process for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think in the what we've seen in the United States is that let me break these down to two different things. So 99% of tactical drone teams are doing this as a collateral duty. So they're doing it as part of their regular job. A little bit different. The DFR becomes a little bit different because it has to have dedicated people for certain positions. But we're seeing in DFR, there's different levels of that. Like some might be doing it all week. Some of it might be doing 3 days. And so that's a varying thing. But what we're seeing is, but we are starting to see some elements like FDNY. I think Alameda Sheriff's Department out in California and some others similar to that are putting in full-time drone teams now. And I'll share this with you because it was funny. Most of you probably have seen this news story of the crane collapse in New York City that was on fire. So they were flying the drones and they were getting all the different images. And I happened to listen in on Broadcastify, which is an application that lets you hear radio traffic from different departments. And I just happened to tune in. I mean, 1 in a million shot that I hear the request saying, we've got a helicopter ready to come in. Where would you like it? And the response back is, keep the helicopters away. We've got all we need with drones. And that's a whole new mindset. And the drones were actually able to get much closer. They were able to get much higher resolution, and they were able to be able to look at it from below, which was not going to happen. But the 1 in a million shot for me to hear that conversation was also something pretty amazing to hear as that transition of thought.
Yeah. And it's you know, since the drone can fly like this, it's completely changed any sort of structure, you know, examination of any type. But there's also just, frankly, because it is unmanned and it's much smaller, there's time to response.
Yeah, you also don't have,
Even the very best manned systems.
and you also don't have the vibration in the rotor wash.
Mhm.
And I think what we're
So
certainly seeing in the UK is we're deploying drones in environments for an air support capability that you would never deploy a police helicopter to. So we're doing a lot of internal searches with drones to make it safer for officers when we're going into incidents. We're doing 3D mapping of scenes so we can make sure we get the best evidence capture possible. So there's a lot of new technology that's coming with drones that we never had with conventional police helicopters. That's the really exciting part for us looking at going forward.
yeah, that it's fascinating to hear other countries, and when you start really digging deep into what other countries are doing with drones, it really is the same exact stuff that we're doing here. The applications are all the same. And Stuart, I know your real job or your prior job is you work for London Metro Police as a sergeant, correct? And if you can just talk a little bit, I was surprised to hear that the drone program for London is actually very new, only a few months old. So I know you're not part of that team necessarily, but can you just kind of go over how they're deploying it right now in conjunction with the helicopters?
Yeah, so it's very much that blended approach. So we make sure in London that we get the right asset for the right task, and obviously bear in mind they're quite a new small team that's kind of establishing. So it's really setting out that foundation for them. So it's basically for us, anything really pre-planned at the moment is where we're starting to look to deploy that drone, making sure that the capability of that drone is suitable for that task that we're sending them to. And then obviously over time we can start expanding that out. And it's a very similar story to how we've seen all of the other 48 forces kind of kickstart their drone programs. And like I said, you kind of move your way through and then you get to the likes of Devon and Cornwall Police, West Midlands Police, Norfolk Police that have now kind of got that dedicated full-time drone capability. So it's a well-driven path for us in the UK. It's just actually, it takes time to get that up and running. But
You also
certainly for
take
us
a
at the
look.
moment,
Yeah, do you also take a look at what London Fire Brigade's doing? I know they've been doing it for a while and have had some great successes, and actually done some international search and rescue missions as well.
yeah, absolutely. The core for us in the NPCC is around collaboration with our blue light partners. So the likes of the ambulance service, fire service. How do we start collaborating? And ultimately, that's the reason why we're working together as well, Charles, is, we're really keen that we don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of fantastic work that's gone out there. We just want to be able to actually build upon all that work that's been done and excel it. And then crucially for us, share it with all of our partners. There's no point delivering all of this groundbreaking work to then kind of keep it amongst ourselves because it's not going to benefit the public in the end. So for us, how do we start collaborating with our blue light partners is a really core part of our program. And we've got a drone first kind of responder collaboration process up and running now. So the ambulance service, fire service, mountain rescue, and the National Police Air Service and ourselves coming together so we can start sharing all the work we're doing. Crucially for us, so we don't duplicate the work, but equally work out areas we can collaborate on drones. Because again, particularly from a policing perspective, if we're deploying a drone at an incident, 9 times out of 10 we're going to have ambulance or fire rolling to that incident as well. So how do we start deconflicting on scene, but equally making sure we get the right asset for the right task there as well is really important for us.
I'd like to ask, one of the things I think that drone responders and other advocacy groups really serve a very concrete purpose, of course, in many ways, but one way is dealing with our regulatory bodies. So it's very difficult for an individual department to engage with regulatory agencies, at a level that can help them reach the point where they can get something done that they couldn't get done before. And that's for many, many reasons, just because of strapped resources and who do you call and how do you even engage into that process and so forth. So how are agencies in the UK doing that engagement with the regulatory bodies to kind of move some of these cases forwards? Things like the SIGs and so forth that are really most relevant to first responders.
So we've got an absolutely fantastic relationship with our regulator, really engaged, meet with us regularly. We have a representative group in the police that meet with our regulator face to face every 2 months, and then we have regular contact in between. So I think we're actually in a really, again, kind of unique position in the UK that we have that because we've only got 48 police forces. It's kind of easier to manage. Don't get me wrong. The resource levels in the regulator are probably exactly the same as they are on the FAA. Very, very strapped, but actually the engagement we've got with them has been fantastic. And looking at a roadmap of how do we make sure that public safety drone operations going forward, particularly in 2 to 3 years' time, where DFR is really kind of kickstarted and being rolled out across the UK, how do we make that as efficient and effective as possible within regulatory framework? Crucially for us, the underlying bit is that whatever we do, we've got to make sure it's safe and that we comply with their safety objectives. But certainly from us, the engagement we've got has been second to none. So we're one of the lucky ones for sure.
That's amazing. That's great. I mean, we definitely have to give a shout out to our FAA friends and colleagues because they have been amazing. But yeah, it's always a very very tough thing globally, right? That you have to make the safety case first. So
well, and this
that's
is
just
also
the way it
new.
is.
To your point, this is also new that we've had to go through a learning process, and that was both on the technology itself and operations. So we as public safety had to get really understanding the regulatory side of things, the aviation side of things, and at the same time, the FAA had to really put themselves in our shoes to understand public safety benefit that could come from it and the benefits versus the risk. And I think that's what helped move Chula Vista and the first drones of first responder program forward, because we were able to show the benefits that could come to our communities by the use of DFR. And I'll just say, while DFR has probably created more of a concern for the ACLU at this time, I will just repeat that the benefits out of DFR from a de-escalation standpoint, as Chief Roxana Kennedy would say, it is the most important impact that the drones have had on their policing in their community, which has really prevented some very tragic situations that could have occurred otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Stuart, I kind of laugh when you say there's only 48 police forces in all of the UK, but you're talking about massive jurisdictions. I was shocked. London's a big city, and how many police officers does London Metro have? And when you hear that number, it's staggering. And the impact that drones could have on that jurisdiction and the rest of the UK, where you may have 46 jurisdictions, but they're very large jurisdictions, right?
Yeah, the
I would
mileage,
imagine.
the coverage is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so London alone's got 38,000 police officers, and then probably double that of police staff as well. It's smaller than Texas, so it looks really small, but actually population-wise, it's very compact. So pretty much everywhere in the UK is habited, unlike obviously the US. So we may be small in kind of size, but actually population density-wise, it's significantly higher than most countries around the world. So it's a really unique environment for us. We have, a lot of urban environments, a lot of big cities that we need to manage in actually quite a short distance from each other. So there's a lot of demand for air support across all of the UK. That's the exciting bit that we can hopefully, particularly for the urban environments, unlock with DFR and provide that really effective service.
But what about?
I don't think there's a better environment than London for DFR when you really look at the numbers like that and the amount of police officers and the calls that you respond to. It's just the environment is perfect.
But I want to talk. Sorry.
Before I want to make sure.
Yeah,
before I
for
don't
you
forget
guys,
this
probably
today.
very.
All right, Charles. Go for it.
Before I forget this, I just want to make sure that, and I want to make this an international invitation, so there's more pressure. But I have reached out to Stuart to ask him if he could come and speak at our March conference, 12th and 13th of 2024 at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. Last year we had 300. We're expecting 500 this year. And Tim, I hope to see you there this year too. And of course, Miriam will be there. She's on our program. And but I just want to make sure Stuart, we'd love to have you, and hope to hear back.
Yes. I wanted
appreciate
to,
it.
what I wanted to ask, other than also, will you come to Busch Gardens in March? is what about the unpopulated areas? You know, when I have had the absolute privilege to visit the UK and travel like through Oxfordshire, things, I'm of course struck like, wow, these villages are far apart. There's a lot of field and whatever between here and there, and only one road. So I would think that there is some opportunity for drones to come out and check on things that might not require as many vehicles to roll in advance also. So it's, you know, sort of the opposite from the very, very densely populated area to the less populated, widely dispersed area.
Yeah, I think the bit for us is we're really keen. You know, we've seen DFR in action in the US, and we know it's a really effective capability. I think the bit we want to make sure we get right over here in the UK is firstly take all of that fantastic work from Chula Vista, Santa Monica, and the like, build upon that. How do we start to integrate DFR into a system whereby you don't have to have people on a rooftop to deliver that capability? How do we start integrating boxes, software, so we can remotely operate that from the offset, really take that big step forward in doing that? And for that, we need to kind of have that in an area of demand where we can justify some of that use cases for DFR. I think the next step after we've achieved that in an urban environment is certainly looking at what does the demand look like in rural environments, because again, that situation you're given it in Oxfordshire, what is the demand for drones in the area and that kind of air support capability? Are we actually better off saying, if we provide that resource to somebody in a patrol vehicle, put them a drone in their vehicle, is that a better kind of use of our resources going forward? Or is DFR the better option? So that's all to be looked through. But for us, the first kind of real step is getting DFR in an urban environment and getting that next level of, I would say, autonomous flight, but you know what I mean? You know, a box that can autonomously deploy that drone rather than someone on the rooftop.
And I hope you know that we have a DFR working group that we would certainly invite you to participate in. And we have an international initiative with UAS Norway to try to help spread the word and share the information. But I do have one, this might be a little bit of a humorous question, but I have seen so many drones in the UK used for lost persons and the successes of finding people. Is that one of the big benefits?
Absolutely huge. I think that's one of our biggest use cases is missing people, concern for welfare. Like I said, you're able to get a really capable resource to the front line, often as officers arrive. And so when it comes to missing people in the UK, you know, we have like a golden hour. As soon as we can get as many resources into that incident within that hour of that person being reported missing, the greater chance we have of locating them. So getting a drone there as soon as possible with thermal imaging or, you know, daylight cameras, high quality cameras, so we can actually start searching for them is a big use case for us. Because like you say, you've got a lot of urban environments and then they just seem to stop in the UK. You have, and then you go into, you know, small villages and out villages that continue. So there's a lot of, you know, built up areas, but then very, very much some very, very rural open areas that need to be searched. And that's really where the drones are being most effective for us.
So Stuart, there's a question from someone in the audience. Do the drones integrate with the HDTV networks that are very advanced in the UK? Are you doing it now or will it be done in the future? So drones integrated with camera systems.
So that's one of the key steps in Eagle X is how do we start integrating drones so that they start feeding into our CCTV network. So at the moment it's done by some forces, but again, we want to find that national standardized approach to how we start delivering that capability.
And then another one just came in is how do you move from shared situational awareness to cross stakeholder collaborative situational understanding? I guess that's regarding, you know, moving between the fire and law enforcement. Do you guys currently share like a network that is?
Yeah, and I think again that kind of comes back to that collaboration that we've got now, where we start sharing the information with our partner agencies at a very early point. So they're completely aware of all the objectives and activities that are taking place in our program and vice versa. So when it comes to looking at software, hardware, we can make sure that we start, the way we're looking at in the UK is very much kind of what does the end product look like and what do we need to do to enable that end product delivery. And if the end product is a seamless integration between all partner agencies so that we can all get that situational awareness, we'll then work back from there to say, right, what software do we need now to do that? What hardware do we need to do that? Rather than buying bits of kit and trying to make it work, very much looking at the end goal and kind of bringing ourselves back on that.
So Stuart, you're being pretty humble in your description of what you're doing over there, but it is. I'm looking forward to seeing the future of what your final study reveals, because you're looking at a cross section nationwide between drone operators, training standards, deployment, airspace regulations, technology, counter drone technology. You're looking at all of that all at once, and then providing the entire country with guidelines and standards, which, unfortunately in the U.S. that's really hard to achieve. But what you guys are doing is pretty fascinating. So looking forward to what you come up with in that future. It's a lot of work, and you're the man doing it. So hats off to you.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Tim said, is that we'll be looking forward to seeing what you do, because it'll hopefully create a roadmap that we can use as well, and internationally, and we're here to help to collaborate any way that we
can. I have one more question from the audience. And before we answer this last question, Stuart, I do want to, I know that Charles mentioned in pre-show, there is something that we do want to mention, and that is regarding remote ID. So before we wrap up today, we want to let everybody know, of course, the remote ID deadline, there was relief granted for the remote ID deadline. How'd I do? So
no, you almost got it.
They
have extended enforcement of the rule. Now what they're saying is, go ahead and get it. You're still supposed to be compliant. If you can do it, don't wait till the last minute, because it may take 2 or 3 months to actually get the technology that you need, because March 16th enforcement will then be in place.
Right. So the upshot of remote ID is they are not going to come after you, but everybody is responsible legally for doing absolutely everything they can to comply with the remote ID ruling. All right. We do have a question. Are drones well received by the public in the UK, or are people really worried about privacy? I think here in the US, it's really a mixed bag, pretty much positive, but a little bit of a mixed bag.
So we recently just had a survey released by Natsu, our airspace provider, and actually overwhelmingly significant support for police use of drones, or emergency services use of drones. I think nearly 90% agree around the use. So like I said, I think that 10% of that survey is actually a little bit of emphasis on public safety operators to demonstrate to those that may be slightly questioning the use, actually, how we use it and what it's actually delivering as a capability. And I think, again, we'll see that increase, but 90% is a great statistic for us. So really supportive, I think, across the board.
90% is an amazing statistic. So I hope that we can also get there, but we're a little bit off from that now. So that's terrific. That actually speaks to the good job you have done in being transparent and communicating the real benefits. So. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, especially Stuart. I know it is late in the UK. Really appreciate you making the effort. I look forward to meeting you in March when you come over for the Drone Responders event. And we will see you all next month in November.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.